The GOP debate focused on the economy. So who stood out and what might the economy look like if there is a Republican in the White House? Joining me is Cary Leahey, an economist with Decision Economics. So nice to see you again, Cary.
Thank you for having me.
So they came, they spoke, they talked about the economy. Let's just now listen to a clip from one candidate on his position.
I'm the only one on the stage that has a plan that would create jobs, cut taxes, balance the budget, and can get it done because I'm realistic. You just don't make promises like this. Why don't we just give a chicken in every pot while we're coming up with these fantasy tax schemes? We'll just clean it up. Where are you going to clean it up?
We did hear from everyone, but I want to ask you, are we going to get chickens in pots if we get one of these candidates elected? Did you hear anything last night that made you confident the economy would grow?
Well, I'm sure it is growing, and it's growing now. I think part of the Republicans' problem is that even though you can talk about the unemployment rate overstating how well we're doing, it is historically quite low, and growth has been about 2.5 to 2.75% in each of the last 3 years. So it's not doing badly. And the problem is that even though Kasich, who was on the quote, is one of the few candidates who's actually successfully pulled everything together, to get at the understandable middle-class angst, which simply means the last 15 years have been no noticeable rise in living standards, where in the previous 50 years you had a very noticeable rise. So it's a comparative problem. The only way you fix those problems is it costs money and it takes a long time. So you can't turn around middle-class incomes on a dime unless the economy grows to 6 or 7% for 2 or 3 years. I'd love to see that happen, but I just don't think it's in the cards.
What about tax reform? A lot of the candidates spend time talking about their tax reform plans. Many candidates want to lower the corporate tax rate. Does that make sense from an economic point of view?
Oh, absolutely. There's a whole question of making international comparisons. The U.S. has a relatively high tax rate. And the sad thing is that leaders on both sides of the party, including the president, want a much lower corporate tax rate, but it's being held hostage, understandably, to overall tax rate. Ryan, who's the head of the Ways and Means Committee till today and now will be the speaker, said, I don't want to do just half a loaf. And so if you're committed to personal tax reform, you're going to go back to the future, to use the expression of the 80s, where Reagan did deliver on tremendous tax reform. We lowered the tax rate down to 28%, and then 2 years later discovered we couldn't afford it. So we can do it. We have done it. But when the rates get that low, you just don't generate enough of revenue. But it is wonderfully appealing. Wouldn't it be great to fill out your tax form on a postcard?
Yeah, just check. Move
on.
Right. That'd be awesome. We also heard about entitlement reform and potentially repealing Obamacare. These have been recurrent themes among the Republican candidates. Do we know if that costs or is beneficial to the economy? Is there even a way to quantify if that helps or hurts growth?
Not really, and the impacts would be relatively small. I mean, did we see a major transition to Obamacare? Probably not. And did we see one if we went the other way? Probably not. So the answer is no. The difficulty with the Republican plans is that they do abandon the great goal, which you can't help but at least appreciate, to have universal care. You just can't get to universal care unless you follow a plan not unlike Obama's. And Obama quite correctly says, my plan is very, very much like the Republican plan from the 1990s. So the Republicans are actually repudiating their own reforms 20 years later.
Something we should keep in mind through this whole political season, there's going to be a lot more debates. We're going to hear from a lot more candidates over the next couple of months. Does it really matter who's in the White House in terms of economic growth? There's only so much fiscal policy can do, right?
And fiscal policy, if anything, is going to be mildly restrictive. And if you're going to balance the budget, you're going to balance the budget on the back of entitlements, and that's actually going to hurt the economy a bit. So the answer is no, not really.
So what sort of economic growth can we expect? We saw GDP today, which is, listen, lower than we like. What kind of growth can we expect through this campaign and beyond? Probably
not to be much of an impact either for or against the Democrats or Republicans. Growth will probably be at worst round up to 2% or at best round down to 3%. And that kind of number between 2 and 3 doesn't make a heck of a lot of difference to the average American. Growth would be okay, but nothing great.
So can they create jobs?
Oh, absolutely. You can create jobs by getting the economy moving. And if we move to a stronger growth path, ironically, the current employment growth rate of 225,000 workers is more consistent with 3.5 to 4% growth. So we have the jobs, we don't have the GDP. It's actually, you got to reverse the unhappiness. We got jobs, we just don't have enough output.
Cary Leahey, good to see you again.
Thanks
so much. I'm Rhonda Schaffler for The Street.